let me let me let me just talk through it, and we'll see what happens later, and then we'll just get to those questions. So, the first thing that came to mind when Sam sort of said staying motivated in the off season, and then described what you
Tim,
guys
could you
have.
put your video back on so we can see you?
Oh, how do I do that then? Oh, resume. Okay, what have you got now?
Still got the. That's all right. Just keep going. Hopefully, it'll catch up.
Well, let me.
Oh, there we go. That's good.
Okay. Let me forget about. Oh, hold on. No, I can't. Oh, the wonders of technology. Okay, what can you? How's that? Is that all right now?
That's all right, mate. We've got 20 odd people in 5 different states of the country listening here. A bit of PowerPoint problems
Okay.
isn't the worst thing that could happen.
Let me forget about that. So can you see me now? Can you?
Yeah, that's good.
All right. Okay, let me get going. So the first thing, I don't know if you heard the bit before, but the first thing that came to mind when Sam asked me to talk about staying motivated in the off season, and when he described what you have on over the next few months, is that this isn't really an off season at all. And I think that's probably the first sort of tip that I'd give is that I guess if you think about the next few months as the off season, then it's easy to switch off. Whereas this is actually a crucial and busy time of the year for you guys, even though the programs directly are not being delivered. So one of the things we talk about a lot in psychology is reframing or reconceptualizing, thinking about things in different ways, which is sometimes confused with positive thinking. I don't really like that term because it's not necessarily about being positive or negative. It's really about coming up with a way of thinking that's helpful. And I suspect that if we think about the next few months as the quote unquote off season, then as I said, it's easy to switch off. But that wouldn't necessarily be helpful because you need to be on. There's a lot of really, really important work to be done in order to keep things going and to get things on track for next year when the programs directly start to get delivered again. So the first slide that I was going to present, the first title is to keep your eye on the end prize. And this is really, really important. I mean, I've done a little bit of work with athletes, but I've certainly done a lot of work with executives and I'm a keen follower of sport. And I think that's a nice analogy because what I know is that, so for example, some of the NRL players who have gone back into training already now, it's only November, they won't start till, for another 2 or 3 months, but they're thinking about the finals for next year. And that's what, when you listen to great athletes, even though they might change, their physical training routine changes a bit, but their mind is always on that next goal, whether it's the next year's grand final, the next Commonwealth Games, the next World Championships, whatever it might be. And because that's really what drives the motivation. So it's important, I suppose, to find what's your grand final, what's your World Championships, what's the big thing that's going to keep you going over the next few months when you might not see any direct programs, when you're not necessarily seeing the kids, which I understand is powerfully motivating when you see those results firsthand. And so it's important to keep that in mind and to keep that long-term picture in mind, but also to remember that again, if we use that sporting analogy, athletes don't just compete in Olympic Games. They don't just compete in World Championships. Football players, don't just play grand finals. There's a lot of stuff they need to do beforehand to get there. And in fact, if they don't do that stuff beforehand, they won't get there. So I think it's pretty much, it's the same for us, even though we might not be elite athletes or in the same sort of context. But we need to remember, one, what is that grand prize? What is that, that big end thing that we're aiming towards? And what do we need to do to get there? And that stuff that we need to do to get there is just as important. It doesn't necessarily have the glamour or the shining lights of those big events, but without that grind, without waking up at 4 o'clock every morning to go to swimming training, or without slogging it out in the gym or on the footy field or whatever it is every day, then you don't get to those sorts of things. So I guess the first message, I suppose, is it's important to remember, what is the big thing we're trying to achieve? What are the smaller things we need to do to get there? And what's just as, if not more important, is why. Why are we doing all of this? Why does AIM exist? Why are you involved in AIM? I think that's a a relatively easy question to answer, particularly in an organization like AIM. But it's easy to forget sometimes. And, you know, I've spoken to a couple of people in AIM and in similar organizations, and especially for those of you that don't necessarily see the kids on a day-to-day basis or in the programs, who don't get that direct feedback of seeing, you know, that kid turn around and say, wow, I think I can, you know, I believe I can make it now. I believe I can get to uni. I believe I can get a great job. That's powerful. But those people that don't have the direct contact, or those of you that do sometimes but don't for the next few months, it's important to find a way to remind ourselves of why we're doing what we're doing. Because as I said, it's very easy to forget that. It's easy to forget, you know, why did I become a psychologist? Why did you get into AIM? Why did I study, you know, whatever it was to do what I'm doing? But that why is the most powerful motivator out of everything. And if we can remember that or remind ourselves of that on a regular basis, it makes the rest of things a lot easier. So to break that down a bit, one of the things that's really, really helpful in any sort of, I guess, any context of productivity or, you know, achievement is to break down our goals into smaller manageable chunks. I'm sure I'm guessing you're familiar with, you know, basic goal setting. I said earlier about, you know, the big prize and the grand finals, and that's very, very important. But, you know, they only come around, you know, once a year or once every couple of years or whatever. So, and if by definition, if a goal is big and meaningful, then it's going to take a while to achieve. So, what we know about those people that set the most, or are more likely to achieve their goals, is they break them down into smaller, more manageable chunks. So they break down that 12-month period into, you know, what do I need to do over the next 6 months? What do I need to do over 3 months, 1 month, weeks, and then even day to day. And in fact, what we know is that those people that are most effective break their goals down into really small, really manageable, really achievable, really, really specific goals. So the more specific, the better. But there's a flip side to that. I guess everything has a dark side in a sense. The more we break our goals down, the more specific we make them into those, say, you know, day-to-day chunks, the more they can actually become disconnected from the bigger picture. So those little things that we actually need to do can become more and more distance from what actually motivates us. You know, so the athlete that's training for the grand final, you know, doing bench presses in the gym, well, what does that actually mean? That's not really very motivating. But if we add that up, well, that allows me to play in a certain way, and that allows me to do this, then it's. So what we need to do is we do need to break our goals down into those small, manageable chunks, but we also need to find ways to keep them connected. And I think particularly in the off season, so to speak, although I said earlier we shouldn't think about it as off season, but particularly when we've lost a bit of that direct reinforcement, reminding ourselves of the why and staying connected. And I think what I've seen particularly in small but fast-growing organisations, which I know AIM has been over the last few years. So some of you that have been there over the last few years would have gone from an organisation of, you know, 10 or 20 people to an organisation now of 100. In the early days, what happens in these, you know, in small organisations is that everyone does everything. So I'm guessing that some of you would have seen, you know, if you go back a year or two, some of you would have been doing everything and seeing everything and connected to everything. Whereas now you've probably got much more specifically defined roles. Correct me if I'm wrong, but now that's a good thing and it's a necessary thing as an organisation grows. But as I said a bit earlier, it also means we can become a bit disconnected from some of the things that originally motivated or excited us. So we need to, again, we need to keep our eye on the emprise, keep reminding ourselves of the why, the purpose behind what we're doing, and keep these things connected. We need to keep reminding ourselves and each other of you know, what these smaller tasks mean, because the smaller, more specific tasks might seem boring in some ways. Even they might seem monotonous or not all that exciting, not all that sexy, so to speak, but they're still really important. You need to do them. And so the other thing that can help, as well as reminding ourselves of how these small things are connected to the bigger picture, is to reward ourselves along the way. And this is one of the questions that came up earlier. It's really important to reinforce or reward ourselves every step along the way, to savor and appreciate successes, to celebrate small successes. It's very easy to overlook these things because we're all busy, and as soon as we finish one task, there's another one waiting and then another one after that. But again, what we know about the happiest and most successful people is that they do pause every now and then. In fact, not every now and then, on a regular basis. They pause and savor their successes, celebrate what's working, what they've achieved. And they do that with each other as well. Now, those rewards don't necessarily have to be tangible, although they can be. That it can be I guess over the longer term, it could be a salary increase, it could be a bonus, it could be, in some organizations they give out, awards every month or whatever it might be. And those things are great. But it can also just be that intangible, the pat on the back, or the telling your mate, good on you. And, it's fantastic when I saw you do this, Sam, or, when I heard about that, good on you, Mary, or whoever it might be. And in fact, those personal congratulations, particularly from managers to staff members, are very, very powerful. I mean, one of the most underappreciated aspects of good leadership is appreciation. Showing your people that you appreciate them, letting them letting them know that they are appreciated. It's a very easy thing to do. It doesn't cost anything, and it only takes sometimes a couple of seconds. But the return on investment, so to speak, when people do feel appreciated, they're more engaged. When they're more engaged, they work better. Everyone really benefits. So there's a couple of things to do there. And again, some other things that just some really basics of motivation in any context are reminding yourselves and weighing up the pros and cons of doing what we need to do. Okay, this might not seem all that exciting, but what are all the advantages? If I do this, then it leads to the next thing. What are the advantages of doing this today and tomorrow? And conversely, or on the flip side, what are the disadvantages? So everything has pros and cons, and some things might be a bit unpleasant or mundane. But what we hopefully want to get to, we want to get to a point where those things that need to be done have more advantages and fewer disadvantages, or the disadvantages can be minimized and the advantages can be maximized. And the other way of thinking about that, and this needs to be considered both in the short and longer term, but the other way of thinking, what are the pros and cons of not doing what has to be done? So if you're looking at something that seems a bit unpleasant or seems a bit boring, and think, what have I got to do this? Well, what would actually happen to AIM if you didn't do it, or if someone didn't do it? And at the end of the day, if something really, if there are more disadvantages than advantages, then maybe that thing doesn't need to be done. And this is when we can review processes, and every now and then it's worthwhile thinking about that. Do we actually need to be doing what we're doing? Because sometimes the answer is no. But just because it's been done in the past doesn't necessarily mean it needs to be done in the future. But more often than not, there's a reason why we're doing it. If we can remind ourselves of the reason, and one way of doing that is to weigh up the pros and cons, to remind ourselves of the advantages and the benefits that will flow, then that can be very helpful. And one of the other things I'd written down that Sam touched on a bit in the introduction, I think, was is to manage your energy. And this is really, really important at any time of the year and at any level. But if I go back to the sports metaphor, this is actually something that athletes do much better than those of us in the in the office world or in the corporate world. If you think about, or some of you have been more familiar with this than others, I suppose, but if you think about an athlete, then they will have a specific training routine. No, they won't actually. They will have multiple specific training routines for different parts of the season. And they will scale that up or down depending on where they are. And in fact, one of the more interesting things I've learned from elite athletes over the years and sports people is that they spend as much time focusing on rest as they do on training. Recovery and recuperation is valued just as much as intense, hard training. They work really, really hard when they're working hard, but then they rest really well as well. And that's something that those of us in desk jobs or in office jobs tend not to. We don't value rest as much. But without that, without appropriate energy management, we can't go intense when we need to go intense. So even though it depends how we define this, whether it's an off season or not, it's a busy time of year. But it's in some way or other, it's worth thinking about your year, over a 12-month period. And this will probably vary depending on different people with different roles. But when's it appropriate to really give yourself some rest? When's it appropriate to recover? And by rest, I don't mean doing nothing, but it does mean maybe alternating activities, breaking things up in different ways. Because without even though most of us are employed for our brains, in a sense. If our bodies aren't working, if we're not fit and healthy, our brains don't work as well. So, the other day, I know most of you were there at the institute that I spoke at a few weeks ago, and I touched upon this, but it's very, very just basic things like exercise and activity are very, very important. The fitter we are physically, the fitter we are mentally. Eating and drinking, watching what we eat and drink is important. The fuel that that we put into these machines that we call bodies is very, very important. And I think particularly at this time of year, it's easy to with the party seasons rolling on. I know you're very busy, but it's easy to drink a bit more and stay up a bit late, and that's all perfectly understandable. And I don't want to sound like a party pooper or anything, but if it is a busy time of year, we still need to function. So just keeping an eye on some of those things, and making sure that we don't go too far into excess, that we don't sacrifice too much sleep, because at the end of the day, something will suffer if you don't take care of those aspects of health and wellness. And then, within that, something that I don't think I did talk about, but it might be worth thinking about incorporating. I don't know how many of you, or if any of you, have any sort of regular meditation or mindfulness or relaxation practice, but these things are increasingly being seen as vital parts of health and well-being and energy management and cognitive functioning. People that meditate on a regular basis tend to be happier and healthier, and that actually goes towards motivation as well. The more energy we have, the more we can direct it towards the sorts of things we want to achieve, which is a form of motivation. And on top of all of that, if we can make what we do fun, and again, particularly during this time of year, I think it might be more important than at others, when there is a bit more of a disconnect from that direct feedback. Finding ways, if some of the things you're doing, and if I understand correctly, some of the things you're doing at this time of year might be less directly exciting than other things you're doing in other parts of the year. But if you can find other ways to make them exciting, to make them fun, to share that throughout the office and throughout the organisation. I think what you guys do is far too important to take seriously all the time, and I say that very seriously. Life's far too important to take seriously all the time. We perform better in every respect, in every regard, if we can bring a sense of fun and play to what we're doing, and that doesn't mean mucking around and bludging, although I think that has a role to play as well. But it means mucking around in a constructive way, in a helpful way, which I suspect goes on a fair bit at home. But we can always review how we're doing that, and look at ways of being more productive in a fun way. And then the final point I had before I get to some of those questions was to remember that it's a team game. We're all in this together, and I suspect, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, I might pick up on some of these things in a bit when we get to the Q&A, but I suspect, particularly at this time of year, although all through the year, different people will be busier than others in different ways. So whereas this is a particularly busy time of year for some of you, there'll be other people, maybe those that deliver the programs, who are a bit quieter, and again, that'll change at different times of the year as well. So, it's really important to look at how we can help each other. Those of you that might have a bit of extra time, other things you can do for the other people. Those of you that are struggling a bit, can you ask for help? Are you fully utilising each other's strengths? Particularly at this time of year, that's if we go back to the sporting metaphor again, it's a team sport in a sense, and the best teams, work together with each other. They work closely, and not everyone kicks the goals. Not everyone, is a star. Not everyone gets on the front page of the papers or the back page, or depending on what they're on the papers for. But it's important to look at how we can or what we can do for others. You've all got your own jobs to do, of course, and you need to do them. But it's also important to look at what we can do for others to help each other, and to adequately recognise each other. So those of you that are going through particularly busy patches and working particularly hard at the moment, can the other people, give them an extra pat on the back and acknowledge their achievements, and tell them that how much you appreciate it, and then I'm sure that'll be returned at other times of the year when other issues are more prevalent. So they're the sort of key aspects of motivation. If I'll try to pull up those questions again. So hold on, how are we going, Sam? Is that should I just go to those questions now and work through them one by one? Or
yeah, very good, mate. I might just before we get onto that, see if anyone had questions based off what you just covered there. Thank you very much. First, anyone got any burning questions that came out of the topics that Tim's just covered there?
I just had a comment that that rest is valued as much as training is something I hadn't really thought about before. So, yeah, I thought that was a brilliant pearl of wisdom.
Thanks. That's Adam, is it? Yeah, look, there's a fascinating book I read a couple of years ago, which I don't know if some of you that are, if you're into reading or not. So it's called The Power of Full Engagement, and it was written by a couple of Americans, experts in sports psychology and sports science, and they'd actually they'd predominantly worked with it was mainly with Americans, but with Olympic athletes, some of the top tennis players in the world, top golfers, a whole range of different sports. But basically, they were top sports psychologists and medicos, and they were interested in what goes towards the best performance. And there was one particular study that I'll never forget because it was really, really interesting, and particularly on that point. And in this particular study, they were looking at the top tennis players in the world. This was, I think it was back in the 90s. I can't remember exactly who they were, but anyway, they particularly looked at the top 10 tennis players and then the next 90 or so. So they had access to pretty much the top 100 men's tennis players. Now, I'm not a huge tennis fan, to be honest, but but the 90th best tennis player in the world is still a pretty bloody good tennis player. They're still pretty amazing athletes. They're fit and strong. And but what they were particularly interested in is what differentiated the top 10 from the next 90, who are still really, really good. So they measured these guys on a whole range of variables, sort of physical variables and psychological variables. They wired them up and then watched them as they played. And they found a whole bunch of things, but one particularly interesting thing, which was that when they compared those top 10 to the next 90, they found a significant difference. These were measurements taken while they were actually playing a game. They found a significant difference in the resting pulse rate of the top 10 players in between points. So I'll say that again. So the top 10 players had a significantly lower resting pulse rate in between points when compared to the other 90 or so. And what they interpreted that as meaning is that these guys, that the best of the best, were much better at switching off when they didn't need to be on. Because if you think about it in tennis or in any sport really, in between points or at certain moments in a game, if you're switched on all the time, you're just wasting energy. And again, you could say that in other forms of sport as well, but you could also say that in what we do. There's many times when many of us are switched on when we're actually just wasting energy. And what we need to do is what these top tennis players have learned to do, which is we need to get better at switching off so we then have the energy to switch back on again. And it's significantly underestimated. There's a myth, particularly in the big corporate world, that if you're not switched on, then you're bludging. And in fact, it's a badge of honor. I'm sure you guys have friends, or even in your office, I'm sure this. If you ask someone how they're going, how you going, mate, and they don't say busy, then you'd almost fall over with shock, because that's a stock standard answer now. How are you going? Oh, I'm really, really busy. Because that's considered to be a good thing. Busy equates to productivity. The reality is it's bullshit, to use a technical term, because after a certain point, we don't function as well. After a certain point, our bodies can't stay on forever. Our brains can't stay on forever. In fact, from a psychological point of view, from a concentration point of view, the average concentration span for a typical adult, well, I've probably lost half of you already because you're distracted. I can see half you're looking out the window. You play, but the reality is the average concentration. Well, some of the early psychological research suggested that the average concentration span was about 20 minutes. That's incredibly long. I don't think many of us can really stay focused on any one particular task for 20 minutes. The most of our time, and in fact, if you think about the way you work, if it's anything like me and most of the people that I work with, what we often do is switch tasks every couple of minutes. We look at an email, then we go to a document, then we go to the web, then we do something else. And Now, I'm not necessarily saying that's the best thing. In fact, it's not necessarily a good way to work. But we do need to recognize that we can't do anything, either physically or mentally, for prolonged periods of time. So we do need to take breaks. And if we schedule regular breaks in, we function much better. And that applies, that's both on a day-to-day basis, or on a sort of over a week, over a day, over an hour even. So yeah, valuing rest is something that many of us could do a lot better, I think.
Tim, we've got about 20, 25 minutes left. We might go to the questions that were posted on Confluence. Jess, you had the first question there. Just to give him a bit of a break from speaking, do you want to read through the question there so everyone knows what we're talking about?
Yeah. So my question was, are there any strategies that you can suggest for building reflection time into your day, or just generally into how you think? Yeah, so I just know that especially when it's busy, I just go, and then at the end of the month, I'm like, oh wow, we did all this stuff, and I haven't reflected on it as it happened. So, yeah.
Yeah, well, that's a great question, and it actually, I think it relates quite well to the point we were just discussing a few minutes ago. So it depends a bit there's two ways of thinking about it. One, what do you actually mean by reflection time? I think that may well mean different things to different people. But two, what are some practical ways to do that? So I could almost ignore the first bit because it doesn't really matter, but certainly what I would say is reflection time is very important, whether it's, that might just mean taking a rest, which, as we've just said, is very important. It might mean reflecting upon what you're doing, what's working, what's not working. It might be reflecting upon your achievements and celebrating them or saving them, as I said earlier. All of those are good things. What I suspect, but correct me if I'm wrong, what I suspect is at the heart of your question is, how do you not let a busy day take over that, so you get through 12 hours and you haven't even remembered? Because this is what a lot of people say when a lot of things that I recommend are relatively simple. They're not, it's common sense. But as a lot of us know, common sense isn't always common practice, and we just forget to do this stuff. We forget to stop and take a break because there's always another email there, there's a phone call, there's a meeting, there's something else. And so the first thing I'd say is, if we're going to do this, we need to prioritize it. If it's not a priority, it won't get done. And that needs to be a priority first and foremost to you or to whoever the relevant person is, but also to the organization. Again, I don't think, I'm not suggesting this would happen at AIM, but I've certainly worked with people in other organizations, particularly say some of the big professional service firms, where if anyone was seen to be staring out the window or just calmly reflecting in a moment of reflection, they would probably get sacked, or they might not get sacked, but they would certainly get some evil stares, because that would be equated to time wasting, and every minute is valuable, every minute is dollars. And I think that's really unfortunate, because we need these times. So the first thing I'd say is to prioritize it. If you really value it, if you really think it's important, you need to actually make it within your mind a priority. More importantly, we need to make it a priority in our calendars or in our diary systems. Now, we all organize our days differently. But to use a common example, I'm assuming that most of you listening have used some sort of calendar system. What I would recommend is schedule it into your calendar. Actually put a time in at 10:30 in the morning, at 2:30 in the afternoon, whatever it might be. Put in reflection time, or whatever it might mean to you, whatever phrase. Because now that doesn't mean, other things might come up and you might need to be flexible like we do with other aspects of our lives. But it's in a diary, most people are more likely to do it. And this is the same for, I put going to the gym in my calendar, because if I don't, my assistant will fill that time up with other things, or I'll forget about it, or the time will go and I won't do it. So, whether it's exercise, whether it's reflection, whether it's a meeting with your colleagues, whatever it is, if these things are important, they've got to get slotted in somewhere. So that's one way of doing it. Another way is to actually just, most of us these days have, some sort of smartphone or something like that. And there's all sorts of very cool, alert devices or notifications that we can use. Very simple. that are either free and built into whatever apps you've got, or there are some simple apps you can download for free that just go off at certain times. So you just, a little bell goes off at once a day or twice a day. And if that little bell is a notification to you, say, right, I just need to pause for a minute, 5 minutes, whatever it might be. That can certainly help as a reminder. So I'd make it a priority, remind yourself why it's important, put it in your calendar, or have some sort of reminder system so it doesn't get forgotten. Is that helpful? Yep.
I think the thumbs up was a yes, helpful.
Universal.
Giannis was going to call in. I'm not sure if he's there. Giannis, you on the line?
Yeah, mate. Sure am, mate. I must apologise. I'm on about 3 or 4% battery, but I'm here.
There's got to be some strategy around that, doesn't there, Dr. Happy?
I say it's all about energy management. We've talked about that.
Giannis, I don't assume you've got Confluence up in front of you. Do you want me to read your question out for you?
Yes, please.
Okay. What strategies can you suggest for managers to employ, i.e. autonomy, mastery, purpose, in order to help them facilitate high levels of job satisfaction for their staff during peak of busy times?
Well, look, that's a tricky one. I'm not 100% sure if I understand the question, but I think the answer was in much of what I said earlier. So I think it's about remembering our purpose, why we're doing what we're doing, making it fun, reinforcing each other, reinforcing ourselves. But particularly, I think during busy times, I think, again, remembering that there's a reason for this, and that there'll be a result at the end. And if you can't see that result, remind yourself of the result, remind yourself of the outcome. Or if you don't think there's going to be a positive outcome, then again, that question, do I really need to be doing this? So hopefully the things I talked about earlier address that. I'm not sure. Is there anything else, Giannis, if you're still there, that would you like to maybe redefine the question a bit? Or
yeah, mate, sorry for the confusion. It was basically like you've got the trichotomy of mastery, purpose and all that to basically drive, I don't know, performance or satisfaction with the role. Is there anything outside of that model that can be easily implemented to, especially when, when not so much when shit hits the fan, but when things are very, very busy? Is there something as managers we can do to make things hopefully very simple for our staff in terms of providing key motivators outside of, the why is very simple for us as an organisation because a lot of our staff are Aboriginal, even the ones that aren't, are very clear on why we're here to do the work we do. But in terms of short-term stuff outside of the bigger picture, is there any strategies we can do to keep people motivated when they're very, very, very busy?
Yeah, well, I think one thing to remember that all of you listening today are managers of other people in some way or other. And so one thing that's really important to remember is that different things motivate different people. That might sound obvious, but we forget that sometimes. And one of the simplest mistakes to make, and we all make this at times, is that we think that what motivates us will motivate others. And that's actually not always true. So one of the most important things as a manager or a leader to remember is that it's not so much what would motivate me in this situation, but what would motivate this other person. And that's what the best managers do. They understand their people, and they will tailor it and adjust accordingly. The other thing, if you're talking about really busy periods, then I think the other thing that can help there is to avoid getting really overwhelmed is to break it down and keep it really simple. And one of there was a great book I read many years ago called How to Get Things Done or Getting Things Done, which is effectively a productivity book, but I think it's relevant in this context. Because at the end of the day, one of the most important things that I took from this is to ask yourself a really, really simple question. What is my next step? What's the next thing I need to do? And then the next thing, and then the next thing. But if you just take it one, if people are feeling overwhelmed, if they're feeling really busy, if it seems like there's just too much to do and not enough time, just focusing on that one next thing and nothing else. Don't worry about anything else. Just what's your one next step? That can actually be, so simplifying it can actually be really, really helpful. And then you move on to the next one, obviously. But I think that can often help people stop them from feeling overwhelmed and like things are too difficult.
Yeah, cheers, mate. Thanks.
Okay, we're going to shoot up to Queensland. Darren?
Yeah, thanks, Shogsy. Dr. Happy, my question was very simple. How do you celebrate after each goal is achieved, as small or as big as they can be?
Yeah, well, it's a really good question, really important one, and something we talked a bit earlier. Something that's, I think, again, it's very underestimated, and something that we really need to do. Celebrating achievements should be done on a regular basis, on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, but it needs to be done in a way that it really needs to be done in a way that works for you and your team. And again, we all celebrate differently, so there's no simple answer to this, but there's a range of things. So firstly, there's a range of tangible rewards that can be provided. At a big level, obviously, salary is one. That's not necessarily that relevant in this context, I don't think. But certainly, if we break that down, you can have a monthly award, or you can some organisations hand out vouchers or movie tickets, or so that there's a whole bunch of tangible things depending on what your budget is, that can be provided to people when they've done a great job, when a task is being completed. But as I said a bit earlier, that the most important thing is to tell people. It's just to tell people, well done, congratulations, to say thank you, and allow them. I mean, normally, what I would do if I was up in your office now is to ask you to ask your team, how would you like to celebrate? Ask the people that you're working with. Ask them to come up with the answers, because again, what works for me probably won't work for them, or might not work for them. But I think too often we forget to actually just ask people, okay, guys, we've been working really, really hard. When we finish this, or on a regular basis, each time we complete a task, how would you like to celebrate? What would you like to do? It could be going out for I don't know if you're allowed to do this, but going out for a beer or going out for lunch, or it could be something as simple as that. It could just be having a staff outing somewhere or other, or there's endless possibilities, I suppose, what I'm saying. None of them are right or wrong. Well, the only ones that are right are the ones that are going to work for those people, for those particular people, and it will very possibly differ in different offices. So are you up in Brisbane? Sorry, where Queensland or?
Queensland, mate.
Yeah, so what works up in your office might be quite different to what works down in the Redfern office, and might be different to Adelaide office and whatever. I think what I'd suggest is for each manager or each team leader of each particular to ask their people, how would you guys like to celebrate? What would you like to do? And then you want to come up with some smaller ones to do on a day-to-day basis, and then some bigger ones for the bigger, more meaningful goals. Does that make sense?
It does. Thanks, Tom.
Speaking of Tom, let's go to South Australia. Tom Putnam, very interesting question.
Yeah, a very serious question as well. So we've done some remodeling of our SA office, and I'm thinking about adding some comfy furniture in there. I'm trying to find out the happiness quotient. So what makes people happier, the couch or beanbags, or should I just spend the money on myself, just getting a fancy chair with gold cup holders and giving everyone else a lump of coal? But I should say, since you've sent that picture through, I think it's an easy decision actually, and I'm just going to just blow it on myself. So,
what's the next question, Sam? No, I wasn't sure whether that was a serious question or not, and now I think it almost certainly wasn't. So,
what? No, it is actually. We are thinking of putting a couch or beanbag in that space, and I was just trying to work out: is there any research behind seating and happiness?
Okay, I'll try to be serious for a second, and I'll say, not that I'm aware of, but again, on a serious note, what I would say is I'd put it to the vote. Ask your people and it depends how. Actually, on a serious note, there is actually a serious study of office design and office furniture and things like colour, and it is actually quite fascinating. We won't go into too much detail now, but it is a very interesting area. And but the simple answer is, like I've sort of said with some of these other things, there's no one answer. It differs for different people in different contexts, and So the question comes down to how is that space used, who uses it, how's it used. If it's, for example, if you have a lot of meetings where you need to present stuff, then beanbags obviously aren't very practical. But in other contexts, it might. But no, on a serious note, it's what I do is put it to the vote, and I'd ask if people say, look, here's 2 or 3 options, see what they come back with.
Yeah, cool.
Thank you, Mr. Putnam. Geez, we're being very geographically equitable here. Reese, over in WA.
The Golden State. Yeah, cool. So my question was about the framing of expectations and keeping things in context. One of the things about AIM is that we're a high expectations program and we want the best for our kids. At the same time, there's kind of this balance about having super high expectations and not being able to meet them, leading to sadness and people feeling as if they're inadequate. So how do we balance the goal of happiness with the goal of high expectations?
Yeah, that's a cracker of a question, and a really, really important one. In fact, it's a crucial question for happiness generally, and for happiness in life, really, because on the one hand, there are many people, myself included, who have said something along the lines of, too many of us aim too low. And I know this is part of what AIM is trying to counteract, in a sense, that a lot of the kids that you work with have been brought up not to believe that they can achieve a certain, not intentionally, obviously, but for various reasons, they just haven't grown up in an environment that's encouraged high beliefs and high expectations. And that's part of what, obviously, AIM's trying to get them to believe, well, you can finish school, you can go to university, you can get a great job, which is fantastic. So on the one hand, I would argue that we want to aim high, and that many of us could achieve a lot more than we think we can or that we aim towards. But as you quite rightly pointed out, if our expectations are completely unrealistic, completely unachievable, then there's a risk that we're setting ourselves up for failure. And that just leads to frustration and disappointment, which is not... getting some feedback. Oh, I think Reese has just dropped out, has he? Or?
Hey, I'm here.
Oh, sorry. So anyway, the crux of the matter is, and again, it's a really, really important point and a tricky balancing act, actually. But what we want to do is work towards high expectations that will motivate and inspire us. What other people in the area have called BHAGs, or big, hairy, audacious goals. These are the shoot for the moon. When Kennedy said they were going to land a manned spacecraft on the moon, they had no idea how they were going to do it. So that's often, the shoot for the moon has often been referred to as that's the metaphor that people use. So I think that's really helpful because, again, it's those huge things that excite us and inspire us, but we've got to keep it a bit real at the same time, because if we totally lose sight of reality, then, as I said, we don't want to set ourselves up for failure, because that's that's frustrating and depressing. So it's a constant balancing act, I think, and again with the staff and or the kids. What do you call the kids? They're not
mentees,
or whatever. The mentees, of course. So with the mentees, I think I'd be really just open and honest with them, and I'd be saying, look, you go. There's so much that you can achieve, and you've got those great. You've got the mentors and those guests that come and talk about how they've gone up. And I sat in the other day at the institute and saw. I can't remember their names, but some inspirational people one's playing rugby for Australia, woman who's playing rugby for Australia. There was that actor, the guy that was on the land council. So some fantastic role models. And, you can sit back and say, look at these guys have achieved. There's no reason you can't achieve the same. But it's not going to just happen by sitting and thinking about it. It's going to take hard work. It's going to be, a grind. There'll be ups and downs along the way. So I think, well, to sum up what I said, high expectations are important, I think, because that's what drives us to achieve as much as we can. But we've got to be realistic, and the reality is it's not always going to be easy. We're going to fall over or get knocked down, and we've got to deal with that. So yeah, it's a constant balancing act, and it's similar. It's just as true of ourselves as it is with the staff, and same with the mentees as well.
Tim, thank you. Thank you very much for that, mate. I might leave it there just so that we can all wrap up in time. is there anyone that has any sort of burning questions or comments that if you leave this or leave your room without voicing it, you're never going to be able to get to sleep tonight? I'll use that. Cool. Well, all right. Thanks. There's still a couple of questions. Sorry, Melina was just offering me a coffee there, which was very nice of her. And I wanted to say no without being rude to all of you as well. So that's why I've created this really weird little situation. What I might do is set up a page that comes off this staying motivated in the off season on Confluence. I'm going to change off season to on season and implement one of Dr. Happy's suggestions straight away. But what I'll do is get Tim to put on the slides that he wasn't able to run us through on there. I've actually also recorded this whole video conference unbeknownst to anyone. So if I can work it out, I'll put the recording on there as well. And you guys can feel free to share it with your team or anyone that you think would benefit from it. What I'll also ask you guys to do, one of the key takeouts I think we should all go back and do straight away is to go and ask our team how they'd like to celebrate some of the things that we're going to achieve over the next month or that we've achieved over the last year, and to share them with each other through the comments section of the page. Because I think we'll probably see a lot of common themes there, but we'll also be able to learn off each other and help each other out there, which was one of the other points that you made, Tim, earlier on there. So I'll set up that page now, and if we can make sure that over the next few days we go and ask the people that we're working with how they'd like to celebrate the wins, I think we've got a real tangible takeout to go and start implementing a lot of the stuff that Tim shared with us then. Tim, is there anything else from you, mate?
Oh, not if. Well, I hope that was helpful. I think we're almost out of time. But if anyone, you can obviously get in touch with me through Confluence. So if anyone has any other questions, feel free to email anytime, and I'll do my best to respond as quickly as I can.
Dr. Happy.
Yep. Oh. I can't hear anything. Can you guys? Or?
No, I think he might have just frozen.
I think we've
Dr.
lost
Happy.
it.
Oh, yep. Someone's back. No, they're frozen too.
I'll get Brendo's in the car on the way down the south coast. I'll get him to chuck his question up on Confluence, and maybe Tim, with that question and the ones that we didn't get to, maybe if you could just chuck a quick response into that as well, that would be awesome.
Yeah, sure. I just wanted to say thank you to Dr. Happy, and thanks for his energy and time. So.
Thank you. So you dropped out a bit there, but thanks.
Awesome. Tim, thank you very much, mate. We'll be able to celebrate the way that you like to, which is to get in your budgie smugglers and parade around the city on December 5th. So I'm glad that I asked you how you like to celebrate, and you said, hey, I'd like to strut the streets, and now you're doing it.
I'll never be able to take anything you say seriously after that.
Guys, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate you got plenty going on. Good luck. Thanks, Tim. Dr. Happy, a legend.
Thanks, guys. Cheers, bye.